Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Oliver, and today I will be presenting a presentation that talks about cooperative learning. So before we discuss cooperative learning in detail, let's talk about the definition of cooperative learning. Cooperative learning is defined as the instructional use of small groups so that students can work together to maximize their own and each other's learning. So when we say that, a lot of people tend to get confused with small group work and cooperative learning work. Like, not all small group activities are equivalent to a cooperative learning activity. So with cooperative learning, each student is held accountable. So there's no one student who takes on the majority of the work within the group. Whereas small groups, each student doesn't necessarily have their own piece that they're accountable for. So it can be easier for students to not level out the amount of work that each student does. Again, cooperative learning focuses on each student having their own individual role, and with their individual roles, they come up with a common goal, or they reach their common goal per se. With cooperative learning, the only way it can be successful is if it has these key components. So for starters, the students have to have positive interdependence, meaning the students have to be able to depend on one another. Each person has to perform their given task in order for the entire group to be successful. Next, there's individual accountability. The great thing about cooperative learning is it really requires the students to work together to get to their goal. If one part of the group does not perform their task, then the entire group won't necessarily reach their goal. So the students really have to come to an understanding, work together very well in order for them to reach their goal. It promotes interaction. So again, like I stated earlier, if the students don't work together cohesively, then their group work or their assignment won't necessarily be successful. So it really helps students determine their social skills, or really develop their social skills, because they have to learn how to talk to each other. Communication is key with cooperative learning activities. So it really allows students to discuss the activity with each other. It helps them learn how to talk to one another. So not only I'm going to communicate with you, but I also have to effectively communicate with you, which means the students are learning how to talk to people, using the correct tone when talking to people. So it really helps students develop their social skills. Next, their group processing. So one thing that I love about cooperative learning is that each student has some sort of self-management or self-reflective piece per se. So the students take time at the end of the activity to think, okay, what did I do correctly? What could I have worked on? What did I enjoy about my group? What are some things that if I were in this group and we had to do this activity again, what would I change about this group? So it's not just the teacher giving the students feedback on their group work and their activity, but it's the students also playing an active role in self-reflection, which is also always great for the students. So when preparing for cooperative learning activities, it does take quite a bit of work, which is one of the challenges of cooperative learning. So the first thing that an instructor should do before assigning a cooperative learning activity, when they're preparing, they need to think about what exactly do they want the students to get out of the activity? What objective do you want them to learn? Next, the instructor needs to think about their group composition. How are they going to organize their groups so that each group member is successful? This is a very key piece of cooperative learning. Next is the roles between the group members. So each group member needs to have their own assigned roles so they can have a sort of accountability. Every person needs their own individual accountability. So what is, let's say, Johnny going to do within the group? Is he going to be the recorder? Is he going to be the timekeeper? You really have to think about those key components before assigning the groups. Next, you want to think about your logistics. What materials are going to be required? With this activity, how should I have the students arranged in the classroom so that each of their needs are met, or so that the groups can be successful? So these are definitely some key things that you need to think about before you actually give the students the cooperative learning activity. When back to the group composition. So earlier I said that with creating groups, there are certain things that you need to think about. For starters, what is the size of your group going to be? So it's typically recommended that the size of the group be between 2 to 5 students. You really don't want it to be too many people in the group, or it could cause issues not only with communication, but the overall logistics of the group. So size is a key component. Again, like I stated earlier, in order for the groups to be successful, there has to be learning goals. The students need to know, what am I going to learn from this? What do I need? What objective do I need to reach? Also, teachers need to keep in mind what procedures they want the students to go through. So if you're doing a science experiment and you want the students to work cooperatively together, you have to think about what procedures you want them to go through. Even if it's something like, even in math, say you want them to work on a math problem, and then after they work on the math problem independently, they come together and talk about the different steps. Well, first, the students need to know that, hey, I have to work by myself first to figure out what the answer is. Then after I work by myself, I'm going to come with my group. So again, the procedures are very important, and it's very essential for the students to know in order for them to be successful in their groups. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is the type of groups. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this slide because my next slide is going to talk about that. But again, you need to think about the types of groups that you want to have for the students. And lastly, again, accountability. How are you going to hold the students accountable? The students need to know how you're going to hold them accountable to make sure that they are doing their part in their group. All right, so again, group typing is very essential to cooperative learning activities. So are you going to have a heterogeneous group? Meaning, are the students going to have mixed races, mixed abilities, mixed sex? So heterogeneous is a mixture of the different diverse dynamics in your classroom. So they're pretty much diverse groups. Then you have random groups where you just randomly decide how you place students within groups. And I will say each one can be used, but it really depends on the activity. Next, student selected groups. While maybe not the most ideal type of grouping, it is a possible depending on the activity. So basically, it's self-explanatory. The students select who they work with in the group. You assign, you say, hey, guys, I need you to get into groups of 2 to 3, and the students will get into their groups of 2 to 3. And then you have homogeneous groups where the students share a common trait, meaning they all are at the same academic ability, or they all have the same interest, or they all speak the same language. So each one has their benefits depending on the atmosphere or the climate that you are in. Or even if you're in a certain climate, you can have different types of groups one day. I know in my personal opinion, I have had each one in my classes. So I typically prefer to do the heterogeneous groups, and research has found that those are the, I won't say best, but they are the better group typings to create, just because there's a lot of thoughts and diversity within the groups. All right, so one of the things that I definitely wanted to talk about, because in the resource list that this presentation alone is created off of, it focuses on preparing students for the activity. Each one of the articles that I included, or the websites that I researched, I found that if you don't prepare the students to work in a cooperative learning environment, many of the teachers said you will not be successful, or research has found that you will not be successful. So you have to prepare students to be in a cooperative environment. You can't just decide, okay, guys, I want you to get in these groups. I want you to focus on this, and this is what needs to be done. Students have to be taught how to work in cooperative learning environments. So instructors, to start off, introducing the activity. Tell the students, hey, this is what we are going to be doing today. this is what I want you to get out of what we're doing today. So the students need to be introduced to the activity. Again, assign roles. That is very key to cooperative learning groups. Next, establish positive social interdependence, meaning you might want to start with teaching the students how to talk to each other. How should they be communicating with one another? What effective communication looks like versus what ineffective communication looks like. So this slide, while there's a ton of information, I wanted you all to really see some of the possible roles that you can have with cooperative learning activities. No, all of these roles do not necessarily need to happen in every single group, because like we said earlier, the group size matters, and there's about 10 to 12 different roles on this slide. So no, you won't always need these. Not always need these, I'm sorry. No, you will not always have this many roles, but you can pick and choose what roles work best for certain assignments. Well, if you have a lot of a science experiment per se, and it has a lot of materials, you can have somebody who's an organizer. If you have a assignment that requires the students to stick to time, you can have a timekeeper. You can have a team facilitator, meaning the student moderates the discussion that the other students are having. This person make sure that their group stays on track. So there are a ton of roles that you guys can choose from for the students. So with cooperative learning, I don't want you all to think that, okay, it's the students going off and teaching themselves and the instructor doesn't have to do much. The instructor still plays a key part or key role in the cooperative learning environment. So the instructor monitors what the students are doing, not just necessarily looking over their shoulder saying, yes, you're doing this correctly. No, you're not doing that correctly, but making sure that each person is doing their part. And if the students have a question, making sure that they are working together before they come to you. So you're monitoring the students, you're monitoring their behavior, you're monitoring how they're working together. There's a lot of things that you must keep in mind when working in cooperative learning environments. So on this slide, I discussed how the students should be monitored. And then the teacher should always also be evaluating the students, not even just after they finish their cooperative learning activity, but while they are working together. Look at the different dynamics. This could be a time for teachers to do some self-reflection, like, hey, I see this group is working well together. How did I set this group up in a way that they succeeded versus a different group? So it can be the students learning and the teachers learning. Before I leave this slide, I know I talked about it already, but I also want to make sure I discuss the importance again of making sure you emphasize how the groups interact with each other. So again, this last part, I want to make sure that you give the students an opportunity to self-reflect. So there are a few cooperative learning strategies that I've listed on here. One is jigsaw. I won't go through each one, but I will talk about a couple. So for starters, you have jigsaw, meaning that the students start off in individual groups. So maybe let's say we have 4 people in each group. And with those groups, in my first group, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to master the content that I have learned. So my group members and I are going to master this content. Then my teacher is going to put me in another group, and all of the information that I have learned, I'm going to give to my next group. So we all become masters of whatever content that we're learning, and then we share it with other people throughout the activity. There's a number of different ways that you can use cooperative learning. Think, pair, share. Many of us use think, pair, share in our classrooms already. We have the students sitting in different groups, and then we ask them to think about something. Then we have them work with each other and share what they were thinking with each other. And then at the end, we ask them to share with the entire group what they discussed. So all of these are definitely examples of cooperative learning tasks. And from my resource list, I made sure I included on this slide the links where that gives different videos of how each one of these can be utilized in the classroom. There's others that you can use as well. And those will be in the references on the back, and I'll discuss the references at the end. So there are some benefits to cooperative learning. So again, it's not lecture-based, it's student-based. So the students are sharing their own individual knowledge with each other. So they're learning from each other. They have great academic gains because they are sharing with each other. It's heightened their self-confidence. I find that students who don't typically volunteer whole group, they have a lot to bring to their independent groups. So I really enjoy seeing that. Again, because of the individual accountability, it emphasizes an increased independence of students and then also an increased autonomy. While cooperative learning is a very good strategy to use within a classroom, it can be very challenging. So some teachers find it to be difficult because, one, it takes a ton of preparation. Again, like I said in a few slides earlier, you have to really think about what you want the students to get out of it. And you have to prepare the materials, the groups, the objectives. You have to really think about how you want this activity to be done. Setting up the structure. So not only are you setting up the materials for the group, but you have to make sure your classroom is conducive for a cooperative learning environment. If you do not prepare for cooperative learning activities effectively, then you will have situations where one student is doing most of the work. Another key piece that can be difficult is determining what group type works best for the activity that you want to use. You don't necessarily, again, while heterogeneous is one of the better group typings for me, it may not fit every single type of activity that I want to do with my students. So sometimes maybe having students group based on their ability and homogeneous groups works best. So you really have to sit down and think about the activity and the goal that you want the students to accomplish and how they can do that. Next, student conflicts, which you have to, again, like I stated earlier, teach the students how to talk to each other. Teach them how to communicate with one another. How can you be a leader within your group while also listening and being attentive to your other teammates? And determining when to help students. When you are working in cooperative learning groups, you don't necessarily want to jump straight into helping the students anytime they have any difficulties, because if that's the case, the students won't learn from each other. You want to give the students an opportunity to sit down and help each other before you jump in and help the other students. Here is, on this slide, I just gave a few different ways that you can use cooperative learning in different classrooms. So on the resource list that will be listed in the references, they give, there's several different resources that solely discuss how you can use cooperative learning in reading, how you can use cooperative learning in math, how you can use cooperative learning with English language learners. So that resource list can give you an abundance of information and even further detail than what I can in this allotted time. So for starters, in math, you can start with having the students work with a partner and explain their thinking to their partner. During writing, they can brainstorm topics together. They can do some pre-writing together. They can do peer review conferences together. And like I stated earlier with science, they can discuss the hypothesis that they think. They can bring some of their background knowledge and share with each other on a topic that they're learning about and make a prediction based on, or make their hypothesis based on their outside knowledge that they bring. Thank you for allowing me to do my presentation for you today, and thank you for all of your interaction.